Hey folks, this is Ben Smith. I'm the editor of Oldtime Central. Welcome to this workshop with Brad Kolodner. We're very excited and honored to have him. I'm going to be real quick and just do a couple technical things so that everything runs smoothly, and then give it over to Brad. The first is that everybody will have their audio muted until the last 10 minutes, just so that it works better that way. If you have any questions during the workshop, then just put them into the chat and either Brad or I will look at them and pass them on so that it can get to him. If things feel like they're going a little bit too fast, remember that everything will be recorded and on a YouTube video. Richard should have already sent out a link to the YouTube video so that you can watch it as soon as the class is over. Or if you have any problems with Zoom, you can switch over to that link that's in your email and watch it there. And then during the last 10 minutes of the workshop, we'll open it up. People will be able to unmute themselves and you can ask questions directly to Brad. So I guess with that, I'll pass it over to Brad.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate you having me on board for this this weekend. And yeah, good to see some familiar faces out there in the internet world as I look at the gallery view and see some familiar folks. Great, awesome. Well, thanks for joining me here. It's a lovely summer day here in Baltimore, and I'm looking forward to playing some banjo with you. As Ben said, if you have any questions as we go throughout, feel free to drop them into the chat box there, and I will try to get to those in a timely way as we march through this Beyond the Bum-Ditty workshop. So for those of you all tuned up, we're in the open G tuning. So let me just do a quick check here. I've got my fifth string to G and D, G, B, and D. Great. So we're gonna try to tackle a bunch of different stuff here today. One of my favorite things about playing clawhammer is finding ways to incorporate variations, improvise, and make these tunes that we play on repeat uh, really unique every time we go through the melody, so that it's not just the same tune over and over and over again, but subtle differences. And we'll talk about improvising a little bit. We'll talk about how to use some cool right hand techniques like variations on drop thumb, some cool grooves and rhythms. We'll talk about some backup ideas like bass runs, walk ups, walk downs, and also some rhythmic things that you can do with your right hand to create just a completely different kind of right hand sound. I see there's a comment about the volume being quiet. If anyone else has that issue, let me know. I can turn myself up a little bit, but I can't go up too much more before I start clipping. So maybe that's on. Just make sure your volume is turned up as much as you can. Um, but anyway, if it is a little quiet, let me know, and I will try to turn up a little bit more. But I can't go much higher, unfortunately. Okay, so anyway, talking about all the things we're gonna cover here today. I'll probably teach a tune at some point, but we'll start here with just a little bit of review of some right hand technique, just to give you a little sense of how I approach just diving into playing the Bum-Ditty before we can go beyond it, of course. So let's just practice just a quick Bum-Ditty here. I'll just give you a little explanation of how I approach the right hand. And I'm not here to say that you need to like change your right hand or change what finger you're using, but just to give you a sense of how I approach playing the right hand Bum-Ditty, because that's the foundation, of clawhammer. So what we'll do here is just show you quickly how I actually strike the string, because that makes a big difference. I use my index finger, and I have this nail kind of long here. And I should also say that I acknowledge that there are a lot of different levels in this workshop, so I'm gonna try to cater to everybody. I'll start off kind of on the slower side and just start with kind of more beginner stuff, and then propel through some more intermediate and advanced stuff later on in the hour and a half we have here. There'll be some time for questions at the end. So I use my index finger to strike the string, my right hand here. And what I'd like us to try together here is to just play a Bum-Ditty. I know I can't hear everybody, but I'll assume you're playing along. So I'm just going to play a simple Bum-Ditty, strumming the four strings. And I think the main thing is I see in general with clawhammer is that, especially when you start to get into things like beyond the Bum-Ditty, that folks sometimes will move their fingers and their thumb and their index finger more than their arm. And I think it's really valuable to make sure that your full arm is moving in and out of the head at all times like this. And I know some of you, this is very basic, but try to focus on using your whole arm to move in and out of the banjo. And you can see from the side that I'm really going in and out of the head instead of strumming like this way. You know, it's claw hammer, you know, hammering in and out of the head. And so with this in mind, you'll notice that when I'm striking down into the head, I'm using the kind of using the right side of my index fingernail. So the side that's closer to my middle finger, this side right here, that's how I'm striking the string. It's not on this, the other side, the left side of my nail, but the right side. That's where I'm striking. And so if you've never experimented with that before, if you kind of strike like this with your hand open, you'll hear that kind of clucky, sort of thin sound. But I find that I get a better tone, a richer sound with the right side of my nail. And this allows me to kind of fall down into the head of the banjo instead of kind of open like that. So rotating your hand a little to the right and keeping it sort of permanently fixed down like that, using the right side of your nail, can get you a better sound, and it also allows you to kind of dive into the string. So let's talk a little bit about drop thumb here. I just want to make sure I get all the basics covered so that we can do some of the fancier stuff that's super fun, and I'll do a little demo here in a second. So the next thing is to figure out how to get your thumb to cooperate so that you can play nice and evenly and have solid tone on an index finger note or a drop thumb note. So let's talk a little bit about drop thumb here, assuming that you all kind of have a good handle on the Bum-Ditty, unless anybody needs me to really explain more of the Bum-Ditty, but I assume you all have some experience with at least just the basics of the right hand. So with our right index fingernail side striking down the string, let's play Bum-Ditty, and then let's just practice doing this one pattern where your index finger hits the first string and your thumb lands on the second string, and it's landing there in advance, not catching up to it, but the moment your index finger hits that first string, your thumb lands on that second string. So I'll do that together here. And just practice your thumb landing with your index finger. And then from here, picking up with your thumb. And trying to get as even a tone as you can as you're going in and out of the banjo head, instead of having one note being really loud or one note being kind of quiet. And then we're going to switch to our fifth string. So we're going to go 1, 2, 1, 5. Making sure that your arm is moving in and out of the banjo head. Notice my arm is moving as one unit and not moving as separate fingers. Good. And then another thing about drop thumb that's really helpful is to think of your arm when you're playing slightly bent. So if your arm is totally flat like this and your hand is sort of straight across, it means that your thumb will kind of land flat on the string like this, and you might bump into the other strings. But if you have your wrist slightly bent like that, and see how I have a little bit of a bend in my wrist, that allows more of my thumb tip to catch the string and sort of the corner of my thumb instead of the flat side of my thumb. Your thumb's a big finger, and to fit it in between those strings on drop thumb is quite challenging when your hand's kind of flat like this. So I encourage you all to just experiment with keeping that wrist sort of open and bent upwards a little bit, flexed like this, so that your thumb tip can kind of land in here instead of, like flat and your thumb kind of muting the other strings. So if you haven't experimented with that before, I strongly encourage you to try to keep a more open right hand wrist. That allows a little bit more precision with your thumb tip, as you can kind of see. This is a super awkward way to hold a banjo and play, but you can kind of see from this angle that my thumb is coming in at this angle instead of flat. And that really helps when you start to get into some of the more advanced stuff we're going to talk about today as we get into some cool rhythms. All that cool groovy rhythmic drop thumb stuff that we're going to dive into. A lot of that comes from having that kind of slightly arched wrist, using the right side of my index fingernail for clear tone, and just having that thumb coming in at an angle that allows me to have a really precise, clear strike of the drop thumb. So let's do an exercise here that you can start to implement into your playing everywhere. When there are a lot of tunes that have two bum-ditties in a row, you know, something like this. That's like the end of many A parts or B parts, just have two bum-ditties. And there's a really great exercise that you can work on and also use as a variation, just to go beyond those two regular bum-ditties. And that's playing a regular bum-ditty on that first string, and then letting your thumb drop down for the second beat here. So that's 1, 2, 1, 5, which we did a moment ago. So you combine the bum-ditty with 1, 2, 1, 5. So try to play that with me here. Bum-ditty, 1, 2, 1, 5. Again, bum-ditty, 1, 2, 1, 5. And I call this the bum-ditty with drop thumb phrase. It's kind of like a roll. You know, it's a pattern that I use on repeat. So that once you kind of get a handle on that pattern, you'll notice that it fills the space of two bum-ditties, and you can use that across all kinds of tunes and chord progressions. And then what we'll do here is change the string we start on. So instead of playing the first string every time, we can go 1 and then 2, still using drop thumb on those first two strings. So let's try that. First string, ditty, drop thumb. Second string, also with drop thumb on the first two strings. So I'm not changing where I do the drop thumb, but I'm changing where I strike that first bum-ditty. And then we can try the third string. And the fourth. So hopefully that's making sense. Let's try to do that together here. So we're playing basically the same rhythmic pattern, but we're just starting each one of these phrases on a new string, going from the first through the fourth string. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try it one more time. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try to add a chord to this so that you can hear how this sounds with some harmony. So we'll play that exercise with G, and then let's go to our C chord. So the same right hand pattern. 2, 3, and then 4. And then we go back to G. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try to get back to our C chord. C. Same pattern. I know this is a lot. Hang in there. 3, 4. If that's making sense, you can nod or shake your head. I can break that down again. Cool, great. Look, I got a couple nods, so I'll take that as a yes. So this concept can be applied to any chord progression that you're using. Let's add in our D chord as well. So we'll go G, and then we'll do that through 4 strings, and then we'll play our C through 4 strings, and then we'll go back to G again, and then we will do D. So the way I play the D chord for now is like this, with the index finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, and then the ring finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. And sometimes I'll add the pinky on the 4th fret of that 1st string. But for now, I'll just leave that open like this, just a 2-note D chord. Let's try the D for a second here. So that's 1, 2. You'll notice it's the same note basically. 3, and then 4. Back to G. 2, and 4. Awesome. So that's another way to combine that pattern with a chord. You know, and you can use that with an E minor chord or A minor or F or whatever. It's a nice way to practice your chords if you need some help with those. and then also just incorporating some right hand independence, getting some cool patterns. So the goal, and I'll just show you what we're kind of working towards here, is being able to do something like this, where you can play a chord progression and mix in drop thumb and change what string you start on. So if you're playing a backup for a song or a tune that you like in a jam, you don't necessarily have the melody, but you have at least kind of the chord progression, you can do something like this. And what I'm doing here is changing every couple beats, but starting that Bum-Ditty on a different string every time. And that's kind of our goal here, is to be able to have enough confidence in this right hand pattern, Bum-Ditty, drop thumb, that it's so ingrained into your muscle memory that you can switch chords and start on a different string each time. It almost sounds like a song. I just made that up, but that was just a standard G, C, G, D chord progression that shows up in thousands of tunes and songs. And being able to have that independence with your right hand is super fun, because you can come up with, just with what I played right there, hundreds of different combinations of strings. You can start on the fourth, you can start on the second, you can then go to the third, you can go to the first. You can move around, you know, in all kinds of patterns, just with the Bum-Ditty, drop thumb, and the string changes. And that's probably one of the most common things. Instead of always playing a Bum-Ditty, say on the first string, you know, or always playing it on the third string when I'm playing chords, this gives you a little push to just try different strings. As long as you have your whole chord down, any one of these four strings will work as the first note of, you know, the chord. Okay. So that's a really, to break this down in a clearer way, let's just try this together here, playing the first and second strings. So we'll go 1, 2, and then we'll go to our C chord, doing the exact same thing, 1 and 2. 1, 2, back to first, 2. And then our D chord will be the first string, and then your third string. So that one's a little bit different. So the D, I'll go first, drop thumb, and then third. Because if I do the first and second here, those are the same notes. And so it's useful here to kind of provide some variety and play the first and your third. So just to review that exercise, first, second, C chord, first, second, back to G, first, second, D, first, third, again, 1, 2, 1, C chord, 2, first, 2, first, D chord, third. And as this speeds up, it kind of sounds like a song. Oops. But you can start on any one of those strings as long as you keep that chord progression consistent, and you're just, you know, you have all kinds of cool variation ideas right away. And that's before we've even talked about left-hand techniques like hammer-ons, slides, pull-offs. And we'll get to those in a moment here. But one new concept I'd like to bring into this equation here as we build this chord progression and build all kinds of ideas, because our goal here, just to show you, is to be able to do something like this, just with this chord progression. Adding in some left-hand techniques. so what I was doing there was adding in what we're going to work on here, which are slides, hammer-ons, some pull-offs, and then a couple of right-hand rhythmic concepts called strum ditties and ghost strums. And some of you may be familiar with these already, but hang in there. We will also get into some even more dense stuff later on. But if you're also just like barely hanging on, great on you for hanging in here. I know I'm going through some of this stuff pretty quickly, but keep in mind that this will all be recorded and you can review it later as well. Let's talk about a couple of new right hand ideas. They may not be new to you, but these kind of blew my mind when I learned them because it allowed me to think about the right hand in a way that showed how much more rhythmic variety is possible with claw hammer instead of just playing that same Bum-Ditty groove, which is so captivating and probably why many of you are here today because you just love the sound of that right hand Bum-Ditty. It's such a cool rhythm. It's a band in one hand kind of feel. But there's a lot you can do with it rhythmically that really adds something. And that's the first thing we're talking about here is called the ghost strum. And some people call it a skip stroke, but I use this a lot in my playing to allow these notes to breathe a little bit more. So it sounds like this. You notice I didn't strum until the very end there. And so for those of you who have used these ghost strums before, you know how cool they are because they kind of create this great breath, you know, that is just like this airiness throughout your playing that allows these notes to ring out. And it's just such a pleasant sound, especially if you're a vocalist. Having that kind of groove is really useful because it's a little bit more sparse and it just has a really nice complement to singing. And it's also just, you know, for those mellow, those pretty tunes that we all like to play sometimes, it really creates a lot of sustain. So let's talk about this ghost strum concept. Basically, my right hand is continuing to do the same in and out motion that we were doing for the regular Bum-Ditty, but instead of striking a string, what we'll do here is hit the head of the banjo, and it creates this cool percussive effect. And so let's try that together here. First head, first head, first tap. And I'm tapping with the outside of my index fingernails. So I'm kind of resting like right here on the head. And I'm not like flicking or poking the head or anything. It's just this nice tap. Now, if you play over the scoop of the banjo, you won't get that sound. So for just this exercise of playing the ghost strum, try to move your hand just over, you know, where the head and the neck come together, just below that line, and you can get this nice sound. Now, the key here is to incorporate the fifth string like you normally would on a Bum-Ditty. So I'll go like this. And it sounds just kind of like a regular Bum-Ditty. And please let me know if you have any questions as we're going throughout. Drop them into the chat here or in the comments, and I'll be happy to help navigate through any issues you're having as we're marching through this lesson here. So, ghost strum kind of sounds like a regular Bum-Ditty, and we can change our strings. So we can go 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a great exercise because it kind of teaches your arm how to move in and out of the banjo head. You have to sort of hop over all the strings to create that sound, that percussive sound. You know, you can't like, in order to get that ghost strum sound, you really have to lift your hand out above the strings, like, you know, out here. You know, you can't just kind of stay close to the strings in this like kind of side strumming pattern. So it's a nice way to just get your arm to be a little more loose. So let's go 1, 2, ghost, 3, 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Now let's incorporate a chord like our C chord. So here's our C chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to G. 1, 2, 3, 4. C again. Back to G. Normally we wouldn't be going this slow if you're playing in a jam, but just for the sake of our exercise, C. And then G, one last time. Now let's try our D chord as we march through these 4 strings. Again, 2, 3, 4, back to G. 1, 2, 3, 4, D. 1, 2, 3, 4, G. Now let's try our C chord. Curveball. Back to G. D. One last time through this pattern. 2, 3, C. G. D. Isn't that pleasant? That's just such a really nice, light, like just really like, just like a sort of a joyful way to play through the Bum-Ditty that's not as abrasive as all of the strumming, you know, that we do. Not to say there's anything wrong with those strums, but it's just like a really nice way to provide some space in your right hand approach, because there are times when you know, I don't want to just strum through every chord and just want to have a kind of more delicate approach. And so when you start playing that faster, it sounds like this. It doesn't sound quite as hollow. And having that thumb in there still makes it feel like a Bum-Ditty. And you know, we're just stripping this down to just the right hand ghost strum, changing strings 1, 2, 3, 4. But you can switch it up, and I'd like you to experiment with this, you know, after the workshop here, playing patterns like 1, 3, 2, 4. And, you know, I'm kind of randomly changing strings, but still keeping it to 4 Bum-Ditties each. So, you know. What I was doing there was still playing 4 Bum-Ditties per chord, but changing what string I started on each time. I might go 3, 2, 1, 3, or 2, 1, 3, 2. You can basically come up with any sort of improvised order of 1 through 4, and you can come up with, you know, this is a way to sort of develop your own style as well. Instead of just following a strict rubric or tab that says exactly how to play the tune, my goal here is to give you some tools to sort of create your own style, your own idea of what patterns you think sound cool. So long as the ghost drum is making sense to folks, no one's written any questions or anything, so I'm assuming that you're all hanging in there. But I think I'm ready to move on to our next concept here, which is the strum ditty. And as we walk through these, we will piece them together in a way that sort of helps make some sense, not just one little piece at a time, but I'll show you how we can combine this all for a nice chord progression with all kinds of variations. So with that in mind, let's try to incorporate the ghost strum here into what we were doing earlier with drop thumb. So let's try playing a ghost strum like this, and then doing the drop thumb pattern, 1, 2, 1, 5. So we'll go 1, ghost, 1, 2, 1, 5. Okay, so that's just a regular ghost strum first, and then that drop thumb pattern we did a moment ago. So here we go. 1, ghost, drop thumb. 1, ghost, drop thumb. Again. 1. Cool. Now let's try to add in our C chord. So we'll do 2 of those patterns in G, and then we'll do 2 of those patterns in C. So here we go. G. Again. Then C. Back to G. C. G. And this time, let's go to our D chord. So, same chord that we did earlier, this D. Back to G. C. G. And then D. One more time through this pattern. C. Ghost. Drop thumb. C. Ghost. Drop thumb. G. D. Great, cool. I know we're starting to add in a bunch of layers here, but that's so much of how I approach playing clawhammer, is thinking about how I build up the various tools that I can access at any given moment. And I will say here that these concepts like ghost strums, that drop thumb pattern we learned, and changing strings, which we're about to do here a little bit more, these things all take a lot of practice on their own. You know, I encourage you all to spend a good chunk of time focusing on just one of these concepts. Like, say, this week I'm going to practice playing ghost drums and find all the places in the tunes that I already know and find some spots where I use them. We're sort of exaggerating things right now. I wouldn't use ghost drums for the entire time I play, but it's a nice way to sort of start to incorporate them into your toolbox. I very much think about playing clawhammer as sort of assembling all these different ingredients and then being able to access them and draw on them at any given moment within the context of a tune or a song or playing backup. Okay, so let's see how we can change strings now. We're gonna go 1 and then 3 using that ghost strum. So 1, ghost, 3, ghost. Again, 1, ghost, 3, ghost. So we're just going 1 and 3 for the G chord. And then we're going to switch to our C chord, and we'll go 1, 2, 1, 2. And then we'll go back to G. 1, 3, 1, 3. So we have 1 and 3 for the G, and then 1 and 2 for the C. It's just sort of arbitrary that I picked those, but sticking to that consistent pattern. So 1, 3, and then our C chord. 1, 2, back to G. 1, 3, and then we'll try our D chord, also doing 1 and 3. 1, 3, 1, G, 3, C, D. I know this is probably getting a bit dense, so just to show you what this sounds like up to speed, to show you what we're working towards, is something like this. This is exactly what we're just playing, just sped up. And so you can see what we're working towards here is having this really solid right hand pattern that's not just, which sounds fine, nothing wrong with the Bum-Ditty, but there's so much more space. All I'm doing there, my left hand's basically identical. It's just changing the right hand and trying to find ways, as corny as it sounds, to sort of go beyond the basic Bum-Ditty. And maybe you already incorporate some of these elements, but I think having it really organized like that is a nice way to practice it. Building it from just starting with the Bum-Ditty, with drop thumb, changing the strings that you start on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, just to review, and then starting to incorporate the ghost drum. And then combining that with your chords, and those are the ingredients you need to be able to play. Great. Any questions at this point? I'm happy to go through anything again. But if you're all feeling good, I can move on. So just maybe a thumbs up if you're ready to plow forward, or if your brains are exploding. Okay, great. Or maybe both are happening at the same time. Cool. But nice. Let's see here. I will just say as an aside, teaching these virtual lessons or these virtual workshops is it's fun on one hand because this allows you a chance to practice this stuff without your neighbor judging you for making mistakes or playing out of tune or whatever. Not assuming that that's happening at all, but it is kind of it is definitely strange on my side because it is nice to be able to hear everybody. But I appreciate you all giving this a shot. I'm having a good time here walking through some of this stuff. So anyway, let's see. We have our drop thumb. We have our ghost drum. Now let's try one of my favorite right hand approaches to changing the chords. And that's called the strum ditty. And the strum ditty is basically where you strum on the first beat of the chord change instead of waiting for the second beat like this. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's the basic Bum-Ditty. But sometimes it's nice to invert that and switch it. So let's try this together here. I use this all the time when I'm trying to change chords on the first beat of a measure instead of the second beat, because the Bum-Ditty naturally has the strum or the chord on the second beat. The bum is the first beat, the ditty is the second beat. But with the strum ditty, the chord is fully presented there on that first beat. So let's try to play the strum here on the first beat. So we're going to do a strum through your 4 melody strings. And then on the second beat, you're going to do a ghost strum. Like that. And you play your thumb at the end. So it still kind of feels like a Bum-Ditty. So strum, ghost thumb, strum. Cool. Assuming that you have a decent handle on that, it may feel backwards from what you've been used to doing for a number of years. Let's try to change our chords. So we'll go 2 G chords, and then we'll go to 2 C chords, back to G, and then D, G, C, G, D. One more time, just to get this right hand pattern really ingrained in your fingers. G. D. Good. Very rarely will I ever actually play the song with all strum ditties like that, but when I'm changing to a new chord, it can be a really useful tool, as I'll show you here with what we've just built in this chord progression. So let's say I'm playing G, C, G, D chord progression. Now I'm going to add in the strum ditty. And so what you're hearing there is that strum in an unusual place. Usually we would put it on the second beat, 1. But here we're going to do it on the first beat. So let's try that with our C chord. And I'll explain why we're starting with our C. I don't find that the strum ditty is as effective on the open chord or your home bass chord. I find the strum ditty is a nice way to highlight a chord change when you're going to a new chord outside of your root chord. So when you're in the key of G, I don't usually do strum ditties on that open chord because that chord is kind of implied through just the regular playing of the open strings. But when I go to a C chord like G, it's really nice to hear that highlighted chord change right on that first beat. So let's try that. Just one Bum-Ditty and drop thumb, and then we'll switch to our C chord with the strum ditty. So we'll go like this. G, and then strum, ghost, drop thumb. Again, so bum, drop thumb, strum, ghost, drop thumb, bum, ditty, drop thumb, strum. Again, G. And just to simplify this, the drop thumb isn't necessary for what we're doing here. That's just an added component of variation here. You can also just play with regular bum ditties. You could go bum, ditty, ditty, and then switch back to your regular bum ditty. So I'll show you what I did there. That's just removing the drop thumb to make it a little bit more simple. So bum ditty, and then strum, ghost, bum ditty. So I'm going back into the regular bum ditty after the strum ditty. I don't do it on both beats of the C chord. I'm not going. Rather, I'm doing the strum ditty on the first beat to highlight the chord change, and then back into my regular bum ditty groove. Hopefully that's making sense. So we've got G, and then C. Again, G. Times. Now let's try to add in that drop thumb that we were doing earlier. Let's see, here it goes. Bum ditty with the ghost strum. And then our strum. Again. A couple more times. And then once you get a handle on that chord progression change, you can go to your D chord. So that's just, the D we've been using here. Same concept. G, G, D. Strumming on that first beat. 1, D. Again. A couple more times. And then we'll go back to our C chord. strum ditties on those chord changes. And then if we speed this up, it starts to sound like this. And this is a very repetitive, you're probably going to be sick of this G, C, G, D chord progression by the end of this workshop. But it is actually a really useful exercise in understanding how to incorporate right hand elements. We can spend all the time in the world learning new repertoire, learning new tunes, learning new patterns with your left hand. But I find it so useful to find the ways with your right hand you can create all these new textures and all these new sounds out of clawhammer with just your right hand. And I find using this simple chord progression is a sort of a nice way to process these right hand techniques. I've spent many hours and days over the years just practicing right hand patterns because when it comes to a song, if you really work on these strum ditty, ghost strum, drop thumb with different combos and coming up with your own patterns sometimes with those, it allows you to be prepared when you're playing a tune. Say you're playing a tune that's a common tune like Roscoe, just to show you quickly how I implement this in the actual playing of a song. And I'll play this tune at the end as well and record it and play it nice and slow with a bunch of variations so you can mine through it and see how all the things we're working on tie into a tune. But just to give you a little taste, this is what we'll work towards. You can hear the ghost strums, the strum ditties, the drop them. And I know I just breezed through that tune, but hopefully you were able to hear the ghost strums that I was using and the strum ditties and the drop thumb. And they weren't necessarily used arbitrarily. They were used in very specific spots where I have a couple of bum-ditties in a row, as we've been doing in these exercises. And not that I have that all planned out in advance, but I was able to practice those enough to be able to access them pretty quickly. So let's address a couple of questions that have come in. Do I use the alternate string pull-off to get a bump-a-ditty effect, or do you usually use drop thumbs? So the off-string pull-off is a very useful tool to create a sound that does go sort of beyond your standard bum-ditty. And just for the sake of explaining what that is as another texture option, I'll break down the bump-a-ditty off-string pull-off technique, which is useful. Instead of going bum, the nice thing about this bump-a-ditty, let's see. And that's what we'll work towards here. I actually don't use these a ton, but it is a concept that I will throw in every now and then as a cool rhythmic variety to the standard drop thumb pattern or the standard bum-ditty. So let's talk a little bit about this off-string pull-off concept. And so what we're doing here is striking our third string and then picking off on the first string, second fret of that first string. It actually doesn't have to be the second fret necessarily because you're just playing the open string ultimately, but I use the second fret. It's convenient for me. So I'll play the third string and then I'll pick off the first string. So let's try that together. The key here is to make sure that finger is down on that first string right when you're striking that third string. You don't want to go like this and then kind of at the last moment reach for that first string. You want your finger to already be down on that string. striking the third, picking off the first. And then what I'll do is I'll strike the first string as just a single note ditty. So third, first, and then 1, 5. So I'm just going 1, 5 at the end. So that's. And that can be a replacement for a standard Bum-Ditty. It kind of has the same sort of feel, but instead, and that's a really useful way to create a neat texture variety beyond just your standard Bum-Ditty. So hopefully that answered your question there, Richard. And so I'll use that just sort of as a replacement for the Bum-Ditty. Let's say I'm getting to the end of, let's say I'm doing that G, C, G, D progression. So that's without it. And then I can try it like this. And so that's a way to incorporate it there. A really neat little variation. And to clarify here, Richard's asking what my thoughts are about the drop thumb versus the Bum-Ditty effect. Well, drop thumb to me is kind of a different tool entirely. I don't think of them as versus one or the other, because drop thumb really, I find it best used to go down to a note that's lower than the melody note you're playing. So when you use drop thumb, you're striking a string that's lower than the one that you just played in theory. So if you're playing the first string, drop thumb allows you to go down to the second string. But when you're doing an off string pull off, it allows you to go to a higher string. So if I'm playing the second string, it allows me to go up instead of using drop thumb to play a lower note, just because of the way your hand is shaped. You know, your thumb can't hop across where your index finger just played in clawhammer. That's one of the limitations. But I think of those as two sort of separate concepts that can be used interchangeably, whether you're going down with drop thumb or up with an off string pull off. Hopefully that clarifies what you're asking there. Another question here, any tips on best ways to break out of muscle memory and adding these patterns on the fly? That's a great question, Julie. That's a really important question, because if you've been playing for a while and you're so used to playing the Bum-Ditty a certain way, incorporating these concepts, while in theory they aren't terribly difficult on their own, the challenge is how to incorporate them on the fly. And I think the best way to do that is to find simple patterns like the one we're doing, like what we're doing here, basically taking a standard 2 Bum-Ditty progression, like Bum-Ditty, Bum-Ditty, and sort of work all the different ways that you can incorporate just one of these techniques. Like maybe just start with the ghost drum concept. Don't try to add, while I'm going through a bunch of things right now, I would never advise that you try to incorporate drop thumb, ghost drums, strum ditties, all at once. You have to work on each one of these by themselves for a while. So ghost strumming, maybe say on days that end in day for the next week, which would be every day, just play your ghost strum, and find the spots where you can use ghost strum in tunes that you already know. Like let's say you have a standard tune like maybe the B part of that tune, Roscoe. Instead of doing chord strums, you just practice using the ghost strum and just focus on the ghost strum for a while. That's a really useful tool that I think you'll find all kinds of spots for it, basically as a replacement for the ditty. Doesn't mean you're always replacing it, but as an exercise to get it incorporated into your muscle memory, try to overdo it for a little while. That's always a helpful way for me to get a new technique into my playing, is to really focus on just one little technique, repeating it as much as I can, finding all the spots, and then I'll naturally kind of uh, use it more tastefully instead of just all the time. But when I go to a music festival and jam for a week, like I'd be at Clifftop right now, I probably use that time to have fun and jam and all that. But I'm also thinking about sometimes when I go to festivals like that, thinking this week I want to really practice on how to get my drop thumb more incorporated in Bum-Ditties. Or this week I'm going to really focus on just ghost strumming. So just biting off smaller pieces when you go to a jam as a goal, or when you're learning a new tune, or maybe going through tunes you already play. Hopefully that answers your question there, Julie. Okay, Kathleen's asking, does the drop thumb always hit the second string? That's a great question, and the answer is no. The drop thumb can play any string. You can play any one of your strings, including the first string, and might talk about that later. But in general, as a backup, I like the drop thumb landing on the second string. It cuts through a little bit more nicely. So in the context of playing drop thumb as a backup and as a replacement for chords and a replacement for the ditty, I think the first string is nice. First and second strings are nice for your index and thumb. But you certainly can use it. Just to show you what it sounds like, here it is using drop thumb on the other strings in a backup context. So here's G. And the standard chord progression G, C, G, D, and then using it on the first and second strings. And now I'll use it on lower strings. Oops. To me, it gets a little muddy down low when I'm using drop thumb as a backup texture. Those low strings, they don't cut through quite as well. So just to clarify that again, here it is on the first and second strings, and here it is on the lower strings. To me, it just doesn't have that same cut. So as a backup, I don't really use drop thumb on the lower strings too often. But in the context of playing a tune, absolutely. You can use drop thumb on those lower strings all the time, when it comes to a melody. But in terms of backup, I don't use them as often. Okay, another question. They're rolling in. Do you sometimes strike both the first and second strings at the same time to get a cluck sound? I will address the cluck here. It's a great technique that can be used for a rhythmic, for a percussive variation. So let's address the cluck, because I use it quite regularly, and I think it's a fair thing to incorporate into what we've already been talking about. So with my right hand, for those of you who haven't used the cluck before, it's a super useful percussive technique. You've probably heard it before, and it sounds like this. Oops. So that's different than the head tap. It's similar in that it's a percussive sound on that second beat, 1, 2. But this sound, it may not come through terribly well on Zoom, but this cluck to me has more of a bite than the light head tapping. So that's the head tap, and here's the cluck. So you can hear it has a bit more of a bite to it. So let's talk about how we do the cluck here. And where you play the cluck on the banjo does make a difference with how much it really cuts through. I find actually that the cluck works a little bit better when I'm playing higher up, closer to the scoop, if you have a scoop on your banjo. But I think really my sweet spot on the banjo is right here where the neck and the head come together. And you can get a nice solid cluck right there. And this is how I break down the cluck. So you've got your index finger striking the string, and if you're using your middle finger to strike the string, that's fine as well. But the way that you achieve that cluck sound is by stacking these two fingers, your index and your thumb. Index and your middle finger. And so you basically lead with whatever finger you don't usually. So if I'm using my index finger, I'll lead with my middle finger. and I'll actually strike the string, the first string. Let's try this together here. Sort of stacking my fingers like that with my middle finger in front of my index finger. And my goal is to strike the string with my middle finger and then let it catch on my index finger. So just to show you, I'll get a little bit closer here. What's happening here is my index finger is hiding behind my middle finger. So I'll hit that first string with my middle finger, and then my index finger follows right behind it and lands on that index, on that first string. So striking with the middle and then landing with your index finger, immediately trailing it on that first string. And that creates that kind of muted percussive sound. And it's a little challenging holding my banjo like this to show this, but I think it's a better way to see it. So good, I'm glad you got your first cluck. Congrats. Let's throw a party for Julie, everybody. That's a big deal. It is actually super exciting to finally get that cluck sound. In all seriousness, it is really satisfying. I hear you. So using my middle finger, again, just to clarify this, I have long nails on both of these fingers for this reason, actually, because it is really nice to have this cluck sound, and having a long nail on both fingers is helpful for this. So a middle fingernail striking that first string, and then your index finger following right behind, landing on that first string. And so the way that you actually incorporate this is by practicing playing one, just a normal strike of the first, and then letting that middle finger kind of stick out a little bit, and then getting into the cluck position. Very rarely will you just always keep your hand like this. So the key is to practice the switch from index to cluck to index to cluck. So basically what I'm doing here is practicing the switch from just my normal strike with my index to then letting my middle finger drop. It's sort of in front of my index. So that's the way to practice this. Notice how I'm slightly changing my finger position. My index finger is actually staying the same. It's my my middle finger that sticks out a little bit for the cluck. And it's about getting that muscle memory and getting that timing. Now, a nice way to practice this also is to use this as a bum-ditty. So bum, cluck, E, bum, cluck, E, bum. And this takes, I'd say, a couple weeks of practicing to really get it nice and consistent. So if you just get a couple clucks now, you're on the right track. Don't worry about getting it super consistently right now. It takes some time to get that muscle memory and feeling. I will say having your wrist slightly bent, again, like this, more than flat, is also helpful for having that downward angle into the string instead of being kind of flat to the string. It's kind of hard to get the cluck when my hand's like this. If my hand's more open, like that, it allows my fingernails to sort of fall down across that first string. Now, the cluck is really only used on that first string, so just keep that in mind. And it's just a percussive tool. The question here, is it harder to do the cluck with nylon strings? I actually think it might be, because the strings just have a different feel. But just to clarify, I use the cluck on my nylon string banjo all the time. So this is tuned lower, so it's not terribly practical for right now, but just to show you, it's the same concept on a nylon string banjo. The same idea, where your finger lands on the string and then your index kind of mutes it and creates that percussive effect. Anyway, all of these techniques are transferable to nylon string banjos. The feel might be a little bit different, but in some ways, as Richard points out, the cluck is a little easier on nylon because the strings are a little more slack, and they just have, they're a little softer, and so it's easier to sort of get that bend, or not bend, but hitting the string and then letting another string follow. The steel strings are so tight, sometimes it's harder to fight through that string with that middle fingernail. So anyway, that's the cluck. And just to show you how we can incorporate that into our pattern we were doing earlier, let's play our normal G, C, G, D like this. C, G, then the goal is to be able to play the cluck. Now, you don't really hear the chords because the cluck has now replaced where the strum usually goes. But this is a nice way to practice getting that cluck in there. What you can try to still hear those chord changes is a workaround, which is something we've already done, and that's the strum ditty. I don't know if you noticed that, but basically I'm doing the strum ditty on the first beat so that I can do the cluck on the second beat. And you can use that cluck when you're playing chords or when you're playing, your finger down on that first string. You don't have to always do it as an open string. But hopefully as you're seeing here, you can start to layer these variations and it creates all kinds of unique combinations. So now with the cluck, you can play this chord progression. Haven't used it yet. And then you can start to work it in. I'm starting to get overload there. Like I was saying earlier, when you start to intentionally add all kinds of variation ideas at the same time, it can be a little much. So practicing one of these concepts at a time, incorporating them into your playing, is the way to go forward here. Okay, so I think I've answered the questions up to this point. Let's move on to another concept here. I know this probably seems like a lot at this point. Take a quick sip of water. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in. All right, cool. Now we're going to talk about how to get some rhythmic drop thumb incorporated into your playing. So if you're really comfortable with drop thumb, and a lot of what we've done today feels relatively straightforward and simple, here's something that you can chew on, and it's using drop thumb in a way to replace bum-ditties in a really groovy way. So what I'll show you here are a couple right hand patterns that I use for a cool rhythmic effect. So here's, let's say, the B part of Roscoe. I keep coming back to this tune. Okay, so what you heard in there were all kinds of interesting right hand drop thumb patterns on the low strings. Earlier we talked about doing drop thumb on the top two strings as a backup. I was a little deceptive because I didn't say I use them on the low strings, but I do in a very specific way, like I'm about to show you here. So we're going to learn that little lick right there. Super groovy, really fun concept to throw into a lot of your just open G or transition pieces, maybe at the end of a tune as well. So we're going to practice this here. It's called, I don't actually have a name for this, but it's a really groovy drop thumb lick on your low couple strings. So we're playing our third and fourth strings like this, third and fourth. So let's try that together. 3, 4. Cool. Then we're going to do a pull off, 2 to open on that fourth string. So it's a drop thumb, 3 to 4, and then pull off, 2 to open on that fourth string. Now when I do the pull off, my thumb is going back to that fifth string. Now an important thing here, while I can't hear everybody, what I'd like to be able to hear is an even sound for all of these notes, so that drop thumb in particular is really punchy. And the way that you can get a nice punchy fourth string drop thumb sound is because I don't really want it to have this kind of weaker sound like really want that thumb note to have that kind of pop. It's a subtle difference, but it really accents that funkiness of this pattern. So the way you can get a stronger thumb sound is just increasing the tension in your right hand a little bit. And when you do that drop thumb coming up, you just dig in a little bit harder. You don't like pluck with your thumb, but you almost pick hard enough so that the string slaps back against that fourth string. And then you can use a Bum-Ditty at the end on your third string. Drop, thumb, pull off, third. Super groovy. So let's say you're playing, you know, a G, C, G, D progression. Again, surprise. G. You can just throw it in there at the end, and it's a really nice little tool to kind of propel you into that next section of whatever the tune is that you're playing. So just to show you how we can incorporate this, you can also, before I do that, actually let's talk about another cool way to play this pattern. And that's with a slide. So 2 to 4 on that fourth string. Now, let's show you how this can work in the context of a tune. So if we're playing I'll play that again. I'll break this down for you. Cool. So let me show you how to play that little melody. That's the B part of this tune, Roscoe. And those little drop thumb, those rhythmic, groovy pieces are your opportunity as the clawhammer player to pop out and have a neat rhythmic counterpoint to what maybe the fiddler or somebody singing or whatever the lead melody instrument is. These little spots are super critical as a clawhammer player to sort of pop through and peek out and say, hey, I'm here too, with these cool rhythmic ideas. So this little pattern really stands out when you're playing in a jam. You'll notice it next time you have a jam in 2021 or whenever we get to play music with other people again. But you'll get a sense of what that really feels like. This drop thumb pattern happens at the end of the phrase leading back into the beginning of the phrase. So this melody goes like this. So that's third, second, back to the third, second fret, and then open second string. So try that together. So third, second, and then into the C chord on the second string for 2 Bum-Ditties. So again, that's one more. And then we have so it's third, second, and then a pull off. 2 to open on that third string. Fourth string, second fret. So that's and then a D chord. So again, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly here because I want to make sure I really get to the meat of this. The melody is not as critical for you to have all the details. The key is how we get back into the beginning of this phrase, and that's the D chord. D twice on that third string. How we'll replace that is with this drop thumb pattern. So instead of going D, D, we're going to play one D chord, and then we're going to do that cool drop thumb pull-off thing. So D, so let's try that here. D on the third string, and then the drop thumb with the pull-off. D, so you just do that once, and then it goes back into the beginning of the part. So you go D, D. Let's try to loop this a couple times. Hang in there if you don't have it quite yet. D. And here's the ending. So the ending of the tune goes like this. That's the second string, third, pull off, third string, 2 to open, so second, third, pull off, slide, slide 2 to 4 on that fourth string, and then instead of playing 2 bum-ditties here on the third string, we're going to use one of these drop thumb patterns. It's kind of like this little echo of the end of the phrase. And you can actually do it 2 times if you'd like. As you go right back into the beginning. So just to show you that again. As I use that to propel me right into the next part. Instead of just doing bum-ditty, bum-ditty, I went. You can also do that as a slide. You have a lot of space there to do this cool rhythmic idea. Cool. So that little drop thumb phrase is just a neat little nugget that you can drop in there every now and then at the ends of phrases to add a little bit of a rhythmic punch. Okay, so I see a couple questions here that aren't as related exactly to what we were just playing, but I will address them here since I've sort of covered that drop thumb thing. Do you interchange the D and D7, or do you use more D? I mostly play the D chord. D7 can be nice when I'm going back to a G. D7 is a nice chord to resolve back to G, but I probably stick to the D 90% of the time. It just feels harmonically more consistent. D7 is nice sometimes, but maybe when I'm playing songs, but not as much when I'm playing tunes for whatever reason. And question about head tension and string gauge. My banjo head's really tense. This is a really tight head banjo. I even have a resonator on the back of this banjo. Gasp, I know, resonator for an open back, but it is called a flush fit resonator, and it's this really cool piece that was built by Ohm Banjos, and Kevin Enoch, the builder of this banjo, kind of retrofitted it. But I like to have a really tense head because I like a bright sound that really cuts through. And then these medium gauge strings are my preferred gauge. So these are D'Addario medium gauge phosphor bronze strings. And this is probably a good time for me to mention that I did just launch a banjo course on TrueFire with lessons, tune tutorials, some performance videos, very much like this workshop today, breaking down all kinds of different concepts, teaching tunes, phrase by phrase, how to add in variations, ideas on how to play up the neck, all kinds of cool things. I just launched it like a little over a week ago. And what I'll do here is I'll drop in the link for the 7-day free trial so that you can give it a shot. It's only $10 a month, and the free trial lasts for a week, and it can be a really nice way for you to just stay in touch and stay sort of in the loop with the latest content that I'm teaching. It's not really a course that I have everything on there already. My plan is to, add to it every month new videos and new tunes and anything that you all would like to hear broken down. So I just posted the link in the chat. That gets you a 7-day free trial to my TrueFire channel, Clawhammer Corner. Okay, as we're running out of time, make sure there are no other questions that I haven't missed. Did I miss anything there, Ben?
Well, I was just going to say, thanks so much. We wanted to, for the last 10 minutes, Richard is going to allow people to unmute themselves.
Oh.
So if they want to ask a question, then they can just go ahead and use that power wisely, jump in.
Okay, great. And so if somebody would like to do that, feel free to jump in and ask a question. We still have some time, and there's still more that I'd be happy to show you. There are a couple other concepts that I was hoping to get into. And so if somebody has a question, feel free to jump in now and bring it up, or I will just keep proceeding here with a couple more ideas for variations and backup. Okay, well, I'll just dive into another little concept here, if that's okay. Is that fine with you, Ben?
Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay, cool.
Give the people what they want.
Okay, so here's another idea that I like to use, and that's the idea of bass runs and walk-ups and walk-downs. So I play guitar as well, and I think it can be super fun to use your banjo not just as a melody instrument or even just straight up rhythm with just strumming chords, but using things like this. Okay, here we go. Okay, so all that stuff was there's just a couple of walk-ups and walk-downs in there that I was using on rotation there. So let me break down here just a quick walk-up that I think you can just implement right away, and then I'll open it up for more questions. I just love teaching this, so I want to squeeze this in here. So I'll show you a walk-up into a C chord. So we're playing our G, 2 bum-ditties on our 3rd string, and then we'll go to our C chord, 2 bum-ditties on the 2nd string. So let's try it together. And then C on the 2nd string. One more time, G twice, and then C. Okay, here it is. Instead of playing a bum-ditty, you're just going to do open 3rd, 2nd fret, 3rd fret. So it's a chromatic walk-up. Open, 2, 3, and then open 2nd string. So open, 2, 3, open, and then C chord twice on that 2nd string. So that's a replacement for your bum-ditty on your 3rd string. And that can be a nice, useful way to get to a C chord. And then alternatively, to get to a G chord, you can do this. is open second string, third fret on the third string, second fret second string, that gnarly first fret on your third string, and then open bum-ditty. So open, 3, 2, 1, open. Again, just walking up and down. And just to show you one more, might as well. These are actually technically pretty simple. The challenge is how to implement them and knowing the timing. You have to do these walk-ups a measure before you get to the chord change, right? So if you're about to go to a C chord, you have to be planning this kind of in advance. Back to G, right there. So you have to lead into it. The final one I'll show you here, as we're running out of time, is this one. And that's a pretty simple one on their fourth string. So that's open, 2, 3, 4, and then open third string. So if you're combining everything we've talked about today, if you're able to do all of this, you can basically be able to play something like this. So those are basically all those concepts thrown in together there. But with just those ideas that we talked about today, as you can see, there's a ton of options and a ton of possibilities. And I will emphasize that point that was made earlier, focusing on just one of these concepts at a time, biting off that amount is much healthier than I think trying to throw them all in the pot at the same time. Any other questions out there before we go? Anything else you'd like me to cover in these last couple minutes here? And again, that link to my TrueFire channel is a really nice way to stay in touch and stay connected. I will have this session will be recorded, so you have access to everything here. But this will also be posted up on that channel down the road as well. So you'll be able to have access to it anyway. But there's lots more on there. Other workshops I've taught over the years too. So cool. Anything else out there? Well, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Thanks a lot, Brad. That was amazing. I never, as a guitar fiddle player, I didn't know that there were that many variations happening in the back.
I know. I mean,
Now I know.
yes, us banjo players get to have all the fun because people are usually just paying attention to the fiddle, and it's nice as the banjo player to just goof off in the background and do all kinds of this. There's so much room because of the pressure. I mean, this is the real traditional. I don't necessarily prescribe to this, but there's a lot, that focus of the melody on the fiddler to just keep the melody intact, maybe little variations dancing around the tune. The banjo I love it because you can add in all these cool sparkly techniques, this drop thumb, these strums, these walk-ups, walk-downs. There's a lot of creative flexibility as a clawhammer player to really spice it up. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate all the thank yous out there. And thanks again to Ben and Richard for having me on board. This has been super fun.
Well, thanks to you. It was actually a really big honor. And I also want to just make a shout out to you that Brad didn't just do a concert and teach this workshop, but he was also a big help in the back, organizing stuff and giving us tips. So
my pleasure. Yeah. It's a strange time for sure, but I'm really pleased with how these online festivals have provided a nice little sense of community and honestly a great way to learn. Like sitting in a room with 50 people at a workshop where I'm 40 feet away from everybody and people are tuning and noodling. It's really nice as a learning experience, I think, to be able to have just a clear view of the instructor and have really just questions that are really succinct and clear. So I think I'm in some ways enjoying this style of teaching. I can't say I like it more than being there in person with everybody, being able to jam and hang out. but it is a nice substitute for now. So appreciate your work on this.
Well, and to sign off, we wanted to encourage everybody, if you can make sure your camera's on and switch to gallery view,
Oh,
then
sweet.
then we can all see each other.
Yeah, look
And
at
give
everybody.
everybody a wave and say goodbye until we meet again.
Okay, so long, everybody. Have fun playing all this stuff. Goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
So.